page 918. The Emes is a very, very poignant parsha because it's the last parsha in it's Sefer Bamidbar, which really means that this is kind of the last parsha of the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, because everything in Sefer Dvarim is going to be Moshe going back over everything that happened and teaching some more halachas, but it's got a different kind of a flavor to it, which Mr. Hashem will talk about next week, I guess. But in the meantime, we've got Parshas Massei. It's not an easy parsha to talk about because there's a lot of details over here. I have to be careful how I say. I'm going to try and say this in a careful way, but there's a lot of details over here, but not very much happens. So we gotta try to work out what's going on. We also need to try to work out why it is. If you'll see the whole of the first part of the parsha, from the beginning until until verse number 50, the Massei is talking about the different journeys that took place during the 40 years in the desert. We need to understand why HaKadosh Baruch Hu felt it correct to put the detail in. Right? We need to know this all over again. Whatever, let's have a look and see what we've got. So it says like this: Eila Massei v'nei Yisrael asher yotzu me'eretz Mitzrayim v'tzivoisam b'yad Moshe v'Aaron. So we're going back now to the Exodus from Egypt. Vayichtov Moshe es motzoihem l'maseihem al pi Hashem. And he wrote down the different journeys, right, according to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means that this is not, it's something divine. There's a lesson over here. Anything that goes in the Torah is something that's got an infinite lesson for us. And if that's the case, then it means that there's something over here which is very, very, very fundamental, something that we need to understand. We're still not quite sure what, right? And this is what happened. So it says like this: So we're going back all the way to the Exodus from Egypt on the 15th of Nisan, in the first month of the year, and and the Jewish people left b'yad Ramah. Right? They left, very proud of the fact that they'd gone. They weren't trying to hide anything, and this is the Exodus from Egypt. Verse number 4: Umitzrayim mekabrim eis asher hika Hashem behem kol b'chol be'Eloheim asa Hashem shvatim. And what were the Egyptians doing? They were busy burying everybody who'd been killed. If you remember, going all the way back to the Exodus from Egypt, what took place over there? We just had the plague of the firstborn. There's plenty of dead people over there, and the Egyptians are busy trying to deal with what's just taken place over there. And now it's going to start with a whole long list. And they went from this place called Ramses, and they encamped in a place called Sukkot. And then they went to Etam, and then they're at the edge of the desert. This is going to be the beginning of their journey through for 40 years. Then they ended up in a place. This is where the final confrontation with the Egyptians is going to take place. This is where the splitting of the Red Sea is going to take place. And they went over the sea, and they went into the desert. And they encamped in a place called Marah. Again, if you remember, what happened in Marah was that there was no water. The word Marah means bitter. The water was bitter over there. God made a special miracle, and He made the water sweet. But again, just a list. Vayisu mimora ve'avo elima uve'elim shtemese einois mayim v'shivim tmorim ve'yachnu sham. One of the miracles that took place over there was that the water started traveling together with them. There were special date trees that planted that gave them fruits. Vayisu me'elim ve'yachnu ayam suf. And now we're going to get ready for Har Sinai. And another place where there was no water. They come to the Midbar of Sinai. And they ended up in a place called Kivrot HaTa'ava. There's a very interesting Sfas Emes. Sfas Emes says like this: the name Kivrot HaTa'ava means the burial place of the desires. Over there it says that the Jewish people desired something, and God got very upset with them, and over there they ended up, a few people died over there. But the Sfas Emes says that Kivrot Ta'ava was that in the Lashon, that in the story back in Sefer Shmois, it says it's Ta'avu Ta'ava, that they desired a desire. So the Sfas Emes explains that the Jewish people had everything that they needed, but they felt a need to want something. The best way to describe it is, when you've got a stomachache, and you know that you can't eat anything, but you would love to want to have a piece of chocolate cake, but you just don't feel up to it. You don't even feel up to wanting to have it. But if you would want to have that piece of chocolate cake, then that would mean that you're feeling better, right? Over there it says, that's the way the Sfas Emes describes it, that over there they wanted to have a desire. It's as if they felt something was lacking because they had everything that they needed, and therefore they looked around for something with which they would be able to test God with. And people died because of that. So it says, V'yachnu b'kivrot ta'ava, the Sfas Emes says that kivrot ta'ava over there, they buried their desires. It's as if they understood that at that point that they'd gone too far, and wanting to have a desire was something which was pretty ridiculous. Right? Little kids are like that. Right? You ever see little kids, the way they behave? It's quite an interesting educational experience. They'll little kids say that they want to have you give them an option of three different candies, and they want a red one. You don't have a red one. They want a red one. So you go and you get them a red one, and finally they get a red one, and then they say no, they want the green one, which was there the whole time. Which is, it's like, it's just this desire to want things even if you don't need them. ויסעו מקברויס התאווה ויאכלו בחצרויס, ויסעו מחצרויס ויאכלו ברתמה, ויסעו מרתמה ויאכלו ברימון פרץ, ויסעו מרון פרץ ויאכלו בלבנו, ויסעו מלבנו ויאכלו בריסו, ויסעו מריסו ויאכלו בקהילוסו, ויסעו מקהילוסו ויאכלו בהר שופר, ויסעו מהר שופר ויאכלו בחרדו, ויסעו מחרדו ויאכלו במקהילויס, ויסעו במקהילויס ויאכלו בסוחס, ויסעו מתוחס ויאכלו בסורח. You get the idea, right? Get to a place, camp. Move on to the new place, camp. Move on. How long are they in each different place? It's difficult to know. We've got no indication over here how long. The question is how long was in each one? So we know that there are 42 different stations, and they were in the desert for 40 years, which would be, according to that, the simple allocation. Are you any good at math? Yeah? What is 40 divided by 42? I guess we're probably talking about 10 months in each one. If you want to allocate it equally, right? So we've got 40 years, and we've got 42 stops on the way. So presumably they were there for, I don't know, it's 10 months. Does that sound okay? Sounds okay, whatever. It's not exactly 10 months, so don't take this as absolute. But it wasn't like that at all, say Chazal, say the sages. For example, there was one place that the Jewish people encamped for 19 years, which means that we're now down to 21 years, which have to be divided by 41 different places. Now already we see things are very different. The sages explain like this. One of the things that was taking place over here inside of the stopping and the starting and the moving and the camping was that the Jewish people had to learn how to become dependent upon God. Which means, for example, the sages say they would come to a beautiful place, maybe it was like an oasis in the desert somewhere, and they would say to themselves, you know what, we would like to stay over here. And they would start, the pillar would stop, they would all start unpacking, and they would start putting up their tents, and all of a sudden, punk, it would get up and start moving again. And everyone would have to start packing up again and start moving out of there, and they didn't stay there for very long at all. On the other hand, they would come to a pretty inhospitable place where no one really wanted to be at all, and what would happen? They would stay there, for weeks or for months. They would stay over there. The idea was what? The idea was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted them to understand that everything that they're doing because God is directing what's going on. Right? Not to make the mistake of thinking that because this is a nice place, this is where we're going to stay. But rather, we'll go wherever God tells us to go. Again, it's a very difficult thing to do, you can imagine. First of all, just imagine the uncertainty. Right? You've been traveling for a little bit, and now this pillar of smoke or the cloud or the pillar of fire comes to a halt, and you think, finally, Baruch Hashem, we can now pitch our tents and we can rest up a little bit. But the emphasis is you never really know how long you're going to be there for. Which means even in the place that they were there for 19 years, they're there for 19 years, but nevertheless, each day they don't know whether they're staying there. Right? Each day that they're there, they don't know. Maybe today's the day that they're going to have to go, which means, you know what that means? That psychologically, it means that you're never actually going to have any peace of mind, right? If you would know, right, from the beginning that you're going to be in this particular place for 6 months,
then you relax your mind.
So you settle down, that's it. You know you're there for 6 months. And the opposite as well, if you know you're going to be there for 6 hours, so you know that you're not going to spend too much time settling down over there. But if you've got no idea one way or the other, so what happens? What are you supposed to do? So each time they came to a halt, they had to pitch their tents and they had to get everything ready. The problem was, though, they never quite knew for how long that was going to happen. It's interesting, I saw once, for example, we're talking about millions of people, right? What have we got? We've got 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, which means that we've got 600,000 women as well, let's say a minimum. So just that is 1.2 million. And then we've got the people who are less than 20 years old. We've got the people who are older than 60 years old. We're talking about millions of people. Have you got any idea that whole procedure, how long it must have taken? Which means Moshe's at the front, right? So Moshe knows that the cloud has come to a standstill and it's time to stop. So Moshe stops. By the time the end of the Jewish people arrives at where they've stopped, it's entirely conceivable. And in the meantime, the cloud has picked itself up and started walking again, started moving again. And that people, half the people are going to be in a state of unpacking, half of them are in a state of packing, half of them are still only just arriving, half of them are moving, right? It's the most incredible sense of
There was never a timetable?
No, none at all. It's a complete sense of instability, there really is.
Even a warning when the pillar of fire will stop.
No, nothing at all, which means that you're just, I'm telling you more than that, right? You know you're in you're in bad shape when you come to the traffic light, and there's such a long line at the traffic light that when it goes from red to green, back to red again, and you haven't moved yet. Right? You know that feeling? Right. You've got a long way to go, right? That's what happened over here. People that were towards the back of the journey, right? Again, because they were moving in a certain formation, right? And with millions of people. So we're talking about having a lot of people, some of them are at the front, some are in the middle, some at the back. The people at the back, by the time they reach to where everybody has encamped, the people that have encamped already packed themselves up and started moving again. What do they do, right? Even more than that, let's say, some people, the people at the front, so they've encamped, so they've already settled down. The people at the back, I don't know how long it took, I've got no idea, I've never seen any kind of a source. But I would say, on a conservative estimate, I would imagine that it probably took a couple of days until the end caught up with the beginning. Right? Again, we're talking about millions of people stretched out, right, in a long line. And that can be, that can be, it can be very, very unsettling, right? Frustrating, unsettling. It's like you never quite know where you are and where you're supposed to be and what's going to be. Why was it like that? So again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants the Jewish people to understand out in the desert that they are completely and absolutely dependent upon Him. They've got to go when He says to go. They've got to camp when He says to camp. It's not their decision. They have to understand that they're completely subjugated to God. The idea is, of course, that hopefully, if they learn that from the desert, then when they go into the land of Israel and things are less obvious, but they'll continue to realize that whatever they're doing is being directed by God. Right? That's even harder, believe me, right? When you're in the desert and you're dependent upon God anyway, and God's just making life a little bit more difficult by not letting you, not giving you a timetable, not letting you know exactly when you're supposed to get to where you're supposed to get and how long you're supposed to stay there, that's difficult enough. But at least you know that God is directing you clearly, right? When you go into the land of Israel, though, you're going to live a more normative lifestyle and you're going to establish your homes and you're going to start planting and you're going to start harvesting, you're going to live regular lives. At that point, it's a lot harder to remember that God's over there directing what needs to be done. Right? That's more difficult to reach. Here, more. Vayisu mitorach v'yachanu b'misko. Vayisu b'misko v'yachanu b'chashmoino. Vayisu b'chashmoino v'yachanu b'mesoiros. Vayisu b'mesoiros v'yachanu b'bnei yakan. Vayisu b'bnei yakan v'yachanu b'chor hagidgod. Vayisu b'chor hagidgod v'yachanu b'yot v'osa. We're getting closer and closer now to the border with the land of Israel. Vayisu miyot v'osa v'yachanu ba'avoino. Vayisu me'avoino v'yachanu be'etzion gover. Vayisu me'etzion gover v'yachanu b'midbar tzin hi kadesh. Vayisu mikadesh v'yachanu b'hor hahar miktzei eretz Edom. Hor hahar, if anybody's remembering, right, what happened on Hor hahar? That's where Aaron passed away. Right, so that's what it says. Vayal Aaron HaKohen el Hor hahar al pi Hashem v'yomos sham. Aaron passed away over there. Bishnas ha'arbaim l'tzeis b'nei somet mitzrayim b'chodesh ha'chamishi be'echad l'chodesh. When did he die? He died in the 5th month, right, on the 1st day of the month. Va'Aaron ben shalosh v'esim u'mash shana b'moise b'hor hahar. Let's just stop here for a minute. We've got an interesting thing over here. We have Miriam passes away, right? When did Miriam pass away? In which month? Anyone remember? The month of Nisan.
How old was she?
How old was Miriam? 86. Miriam was 6 years old when. 126. I'm sorry. Miriam was 6 years older than Moshe Rabbeinu and 3 years older than Aaron. Right? She was the oldest in the family. Miriam passed away in Nisan. Aaron passes away in Av, and Moshe passes away in Adar. So we've got it. It's a year, right? In the process of a year. What's interesting is it says like this: that when Miriam passes away, it says which month she passed away in. When Aaron passes away, it says which month and which day he passed away in. And when Moshe passes away, it doesn't say anything. We don't know which month and we don't know which day. In the oral tradition, it tells us that he passed away on the day that he was born. So we know that he was born on the 7th of Adar, so we know that he died on the 7th of Adar as well. Right? So the question is, why over here, we seem to have information over here which is superfluous, right? Why do we need to know exactly which day Aaron died? It says over Vayal Aaron HaKohen el Har HaHar pi Hashem v'yom Hasham b'shnas ha'arbaim l'tzeis b'nei Yisrael mi'etz Mitzrayim b'chodesh ha'chamishi be'echad l'chodesh, on Rosh Chodesh, on the 1st day of the month. Right? Which is the 5th month of the year. So let's work it out. We've got Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av. So let's work it out. I still want a very beautiful explanation like this. Miriam and Aaron and Moshe didn't die because of the sin of the spies. The people who died in the sin of the spies, when did they die? Which day of the year did they die on? They died on the 9th of Av, right? If you remember the story, that every year they would get themselves ready, and every year a certain amount of them would die, and on the 40th year nobody died, right? And that's how they knew that the decree was over. Which means like this: Miriam, all we need to know by Miriam is that she died in the month of Nisan. We don't need to know which day she died to understand that she's not included in the sin of the spies. Because the sin of the spies was causing people to die when? Only on the 9th of Av. Right? The problem is that if you say that Aaron dies in the month of Av and you don't say when, what's the problem? So people could possibly come to the mistaken assumption that Aaron was included in the sin of the Meraglim, of the spies, and therefore he died together with everybody else, which is why the Torah is coming to emphasize that he died b'shnat ha'abim l'tzeit b'nei Yisrael mi'etz Mitzrayim b'chodesh ha'chamishi, which is the month of Av, but when? Be'echad l'chodesh, not on the 9th of Av, but on Rosh Chodesh. By Moshe, there's no necessity whatsoever to say when he died, because we know that it's already after the decree has been lifted. Which means that Moshe's passing away, we know, has got nothing to do whatsoever with the Meraglim, with the spies, and therefore it's not a piece of information that needs to be put into the written Torah itself to let us know that it wasn't included in that, and it's a decree that was given to him by God himself. Aaron ben shalosh ve'etzim u'mash shana Aaron was 123 years old, but Massei b'Hor when he died on Hor. Then it gives a little bit more detail. Vayishma Knani Melech Oram Hu Yeshiv B'Negv Ba'oretz Canaan B'Voy B'nei Yisrael, and that's when we had this battle with the king of Canaan, which wasn't really the king of Canaan at all. It was really the Amalekim, but they were dressed up as Canaanim. Vayisu meHoraha v'Yachnu b'Tzalmoina, and they went from Horaha to a place called Tzalmoina. Vayisu miTzalmoina v'Yachnu b'Funoin, Vayisu miPunoin v'Yachnu b'Oivois, Vayisu me'Oivois v'Yachnu b'Iyeh Avarim b'Gvul Moav, Vayisu mi'Yim v'Yachnu b'Divoin God, Vayisu miDivoin God v'Yachnu b'Amon devlasoima, Vayisu ma'Amon devlasoima v'Yachnu b'Horei Avarim lifnei Nevoi. And now we're right there. Vayisu meharei Avarim v'Yachnu ba'Avois Moav al Yaden Yerechoi, v'Yachnu al Yaden mibeis hayishimois ad ovel hashitim ba'Avois Moav.
Why do they bring up this king? I mean, there was other people that before along the way. Why was?
Why have we got this particular thing over here?
I mean, we encountered so many different monarchies as we went along.
So I think maybe Pshat over here, I don't see, Rashi doesn't say anything, and I don't see any footnotes over here from Rabbi Scroll, but I think Pshat over here is that the reason why the king went to war against the Jewish people was because he heard that Aaron had died, right? If you remember, when Aaron died, the clouds of glory disappeared, right? Which means that he heard, and he felt that now he's got a chance to be able to do something about it, which means it's a direct connection between the death of Aaron to the attack of, right, Melech Canaan, or whoever he was, Melech Amalek. So here, let's try to understand why is the Torah giving us all of this information? Again, everything that appears in the Torah is something which is nitzchias, it's something for eternity. There's a lesson over here which we have to learn. We're not quite sure what it is though, right? Because all we're doing is being given a list of names, one after the other, of the different stops that the Jewish people took on the way. How many were there? There were 42. So there's a very famous explanation which is given by Rav Chaim Volozhin, the foremost student of the Vilna Gaon. Lived, 200 years ago, approximately. And he says like this, that what's being described over here is not just the journey of the Jewish people through the desert in order to get from Egypt to Israel. Rather, what is being described over here is a blueprint of Jewish history. There will be 42 stops on the way from the exodus from Egypt until our entry into the land of Israel, not just through the desert, but rather throughout history. 42 moments in Jewish history which are going to be the journey that the Jewish nation is going to make in order to bring it to the Messianic era, to the moment when the Mashiach will come. It should be very soon in Mitzvah Hashem, and the land of Israel will truly belong to us. They tell over a story. Rav Chaim from Volozhin was he didn't show his emotions very much. But his students said that there was one very memorable Sudah Shlishit, one very memorable third meal on Parshat Massei, when he started to cry. And he explained to his Talmidim, he explained to his students over there about this idea of the different stops on the way. Now, I don't know what these stops correspond to in history. I don't have a clue, right? Presumably you need some kind of Kabbalistic insight to be able to draw, a line between each stop to a moment in history and say, this is what this is talking about. However, what Rav Chaim Volozhin said was that he sees that the final stop, he called it a station, which is a station, the final station, the final stop on the way is going to be the most difficult stop of all for the Jewish people. And he said it will be over the ocean. It's interesting, right? Now, what's he referring to? So I once heard from one of my Rebbis who said like this, it's a very fascinating idea. If I were to ask you, what do you imagine, certainly in contemporary history, what was the most difficult, the most terrible time for the Jewish people? Right? We would all say the Holocaust, for sure. right? The decimation of a third of world Jewry, the way that it was done, the camps and the bestiality and everything that went, everything that happened. It's something, even today, it's something which is incomprehensible. It really is. How it's conceivable that people could have behaved like that, how they could have done how they could have done what they did. It's impossible to understand, right? So if we were to say what was the most terrible moment in Jewish history, certainly over the last however many hundreds of years, maybe from the Spanish Inquisition onwards, from 1492 onwards, we will all say the Holocaust. I think that's universally accepted. And yet Rav Chaim Volozhin has said that the most difficult time for the Jewish people is going to be over the ocean, on the other side of the ocean. What does that mean? So I once heard from one of my rabbis like this, that it's true the Holocaust was the most terrible, terrible moment in Jewish history, but the Holocaust at least had a dimension to it which was, believe it or not, a glimmer of light, a tiny glimmer of light behind the black clouds, was that we could recognize who our enemies were. However difficult it is, at least you know who you're fighting against and you know what you're fighting against as well. This Rebbe said like this, that when Rav Chaim Volozhin talked about the other side of the ocean, he's talking about America. He's talking about what's going to be when the Jews end up in America, and over there, Baruch Hashem, there's no physical danger to the Jewish people in America. But there's a spiritual danger instead. And the spiritual danger is something which is as, if not more dangerous than the physical danger. Because what's Pshat? Pshat is like this. If somebody's physically trying to annihilate you, so what will they do? If they succeed, so they'll kill the person will die physically, but spiritually they'll remain alive. But if you live in a place where assimilation is rampant, where it's just what everybody does and nobody knows anything and nobody cares about anything anymore, so the person stays alive physically, but what happens to him spiritually? He disappears. He's gone. And that's something even worse. And I think that's a terrifying idea. I really do. This idea that we spoke about this last week or the week before, I can't remember, but America being a Malchus Shel Chesed, that America is a nation of it's the most wonderful place for the Jewish people to be. Being the most wonderful place of safety, the most wonderful place of being able to expand, that the Orthodox Jewish world is expanding and growing, and the American government allows that to happen, encourages it to happen. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing, it really is. But says Rav Chaim Volozhin, it carries together with that there's a tremendous
problem,
danger that comes with it. Believe it or not, it's kind of paradoxical, but the more comfortable we are, the greater is the chance that we'll decide that we're going to assimilate into whatever culture it is. It's the most incredible thing, it really is.
You know what, it's very true.
Jewish history has proved that over and over again, that's for sure. But it's something which it's truly, nothing's changed. Right? It happened when Napoleon took the ghetto walls down. It happened earlier than that as well. And the trigger for overt persecution of the Jewish nation has normally been when the Jews are trying too hard to become one with the other nations of the world. Here, listen to this. It says, back in Sefer Shmos, back at the very beginning of the story of the Exodus, before the Exodus had even taken place, it says like this. So Joseph dies, and his brothers die, and that generation dies out. Uvenei Yisrael, the Jewish people, what happened to them? Paru v'yishratzu v'yirbu v'ya'atzmu b'ma'oid ma'oid. That the Jewish people started to reproduce, and it was we were very prolific. Yeah, the Gemara learns that because there are 6 different words that are used over here, that women were having 6 babies at once. However, one of the words over here doesn't make any sense. It says paru, which means to be fruitful. It says yirbu, which means a lot, v'atzmu, and strong, b'ma'oid ma'oid, many, many. But the second word that's used is the word vayishratzu, which means to swarm. How do they translate it here?
What?
Teamed, swarm. Like it's you know there's you know what a sheretz is? A sheretz is a rodent. You hear, it's an interesting thing. Why on earth would the Torah describe the Jewish people's reproduction as being rodent-like? Very strange. It's a very, very strange language to use. So some of the Mefarshim want to explain it. Some of the commentaries want to explain like this: Uvenei so paru v'yishratzu v'yirbu, that the Jewish people were reproducing, and they wanted to assimilate, and they wanted to start moving into the Egyptian areas, and the Egyptians looked at them as being like rodents. Yipshat. The whole time that the Jewish people are encamped and living in Goshen, out of the sight of the Egyptian people, so nobody cares what's going on with them. They can have as many children as they want, right? They're in Goshen in a self-imposed ghetto. That's exactly what it was. Not a ghetto. It wasn't an uncomfortable place to be. It was very large and it was very fruitful and it was a very fertile place to be. But it was a self-imposed ghetto. They weren't moving out. But once they started moving out, the other nations that were there, the Egyptians that were there, they look at the Jewish people as being like rodents. It's interesting. One of the things that the Nazis did in their propaganda was that they turned the Jews into rats. It's ridiculous, right? We all know that, rats are not human beings and human beings are not rats, and that the Nazis succeeded in turning the Jewish people into rats because that's what people wanted to hear. That's what they wanted to believe. So Rav Chaim Volozhin, what happened to him? He understood that however difficult the stop is that's going to bring us to the Holocaust and everything that took place in the Holocaust, in a certain way, again, I'm not trying to judge anything over here. I'm not telling you what's better and what's worse. But in a certain way, he's saying that what will happen afterwards will be even more difficult. Because afterwards we're going to be killed through what? Through love we're going to be killed, not through hate. The American society, American culture will kill, it will snuff out the fire of Jewish passion. It will disappear. And that's what it's done. It really has.
Something very true.
Which means that unfortunately, however wonderful it is that the Jewish nation, that the frum Orthodox communities in America are growing by leaps and bounds, and it's fantastic, it really is. But on the other end,
the majority are not.
We're hemorrhaging Jews. It's something terrible what's going on at the other end. Stop and think about it. When I was growing up, I lived in London. I lived in a place called Golders Green. Golders Green is a very Jewish area. I used to go back from time to time with my kids. I visit my parents, whatever. So for a while, when my kids were small, they were convinced that the whole of London was like Golders Green. That there were Jews everywhere and that all the shops were Jewish and all the restaurants were kosher, because that's what they saw, There were shuls everywhere, there were kosher restaurants everywhere, there were kosher stores everywhere, there were regular stores as well that were being run by frum Jews. A little bit like going into Flatbush or going into Borough Park. You imagine that the whole of New York must look like that. So once I wanted to show them. So the emes is that in Golders Green, if you walk from one side, if you walk out of Golders Green, you won't find any Jews anymore. Right? It was like a 10-minute walk from where we were staying. I took my kids for a walk. Stepped out of, you went past the last Jewish road. And then all of a sudden there are no shuls anymore, there are no Jews anymore. So I showed my kids, I said they're getting a skewed idea of what's going on in London. I don't know how many people live in London. I think there's 6 or 7 million people that live in London.
How many Jews in London?
How many Jews in London? Maybe 250,000.
The big demonstration of Palestinians yesterday.
Yeah, of course.
And in Paris. Wow.
Of course.
And the governments cannot do anything. That was like unbelievable.
There's what to be concerned about. There really is. There's maybe 280,000 Jews in England in total.
Now the French Jews are getting out, but I have the next one is going to be London.
It's not. It's not the next one. They're like dominoes. They've already gone, which means that London's already. It's already experiencing this.
they are.
The only significant demographic group which is growing in Europe are the Muslims right now.
That's it.
In Europe, they don't even have, certain countries in Europe don't even have a top-up rate, right? Which means that the European families aren't producing enough children to replace themselves. I think if my memory serves me correct, the average birth of Europeans in Europe is 1.9 children per family. I'm not quite sure how you get to have 1.9 children, I don't know, but it's an average, right? 1.9, but you've got, there are two people, husband and a wife, right? And they're only producing 1.9 children, which means that the next, give it 2 generations, and the refresh rate is not going to take care of the amount of people that are
Being born.
right? The deaths and the births are not, they're not going to match each other up. And that's, but the Muslim population, which is growing, is going to take, they don't have to do anything, they really don't. They can just wait. If they wait a couple of generations, there are going to be places where it's going to be almost impossible to imagine that they won't take over. They already have in Paris, they already have two areas in Paris which are no-go zones for the police. They won't go in there. Scared to go in. In London, there's also, places where the police are very, very unhappy about going into. Holland, Germany, lots of places. Right?
Belgium already. Yeah.
What's the answer? If we've got to do what we have to do. What we have to do is we have to try to bring Jewishly aware people back into the Jewish fold. That's what we have to do. Which means that all of these Jews that are leaving Judaism, they're leaving through ignorance. Right? Somehow or other we have to try to spread out and to let them see the beauty of what being Jewish is all about. And I've said this before in the past, not to necessarily concentrate on making people frum. Let's concentrate on trying to get Jews to marry Jews. Right? Non-affiliated Jews. Let's just try to get them to understand that's what they should do. The one thing that they did, birthright, who have brought in, how many have they brought in birthright? I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people over the last, whatever it is, the last 12 years that they've been going or something like that. The one thing that they've done is that they have, I don't think birthright has a very significant success rate in making people frum. But they've got a very significant success rate in getting American students to say that they're only going to get married to another Jew. And that's very, very important. Very important.
That's the most important.
That's it. That's the continuity of the Jewish people. And the Jewish people have to be comprised of everybody, right? From the ultra-Orthodox to the ultra-non-Orthodox, right? Whatever you want to call them. But it's got to be comprised of everybody. And that's what we have to be concerned about. We have to be concerned. And this was a concern of Rav Chaim Volozhin. Can you imagine that he's crying not over the loss of physical life, he's crying over the loss of spiritual life that's going to take place. And it's taking place today. It's something terrible, right? Non-affiliated Jews are by far the largest group of Jews in America, in Europe as well, I'm sure, actually. I once had an argument with somebody. There was a guy here from Chicago. So he told me that, I was telling him this whole thing. I said, if you ask me, I think even if you want to be optimistic, I think only 85%. I'm sorry, I think 85% of the Jewish world is not religious. I mean, that's horrific, right? It's terrible. I think that's being pretty optimistic as well. I'm not convinced that it's even that much. But let's say 15% of the Jewish world is frum. So he says, what are you talking about? He says, I come from Chicago. He says, there are at least 200,000 frum Jewish people in Chicago. That didn't sound right to me. So I said to him, really? I said, that can't be. He says, yeah, for sure. So I said, you know what, here, come with me. So we went to Rabbi Salinger. Rabbi Salinger comes originally from Chicago. So I said to him, how many frum Jewish families are there in Chicago? So he said, this is going back a bit. I'm sure things have changed, pointing in an upwards direction. But even then, he said they just brought out a frum Jewish directory for Chicago. And there are basically two major, places where frum Jews are found. He said there are approximately 2,000 families in both of them. See, what's the problem? This guy was living in one of those areas. Right? It's exactly like my kids thought about Golders Green. He's living in that area, and he imagines that the rest of Chicago probably looks like that as well. So just extrapolate outwards. I heard once a fantastic story. One of my Rebbes, Rav Milevsky, before he came to teach in Or Sameach, he was the chief rabbi of Mexico City. Mexico City is the largest capital city, population-wise, in the world, I believe. Right? It has 23 million. Yeah. 23 million people living in there. That was yesterday, right? Today is probably 24. And so he had a friend came from New York to come and visit him. So the friend gets into the taxi, asks it to get taken to the chief rabbi's house. And on the way, he's having a little discussion with the taxi driver. So with rudimentary, the rudimentary language, they're managing to communicate with each other. So he says to him, tell me, he says, how many Jews are there in Mexico City? So the taxi driver is not Jewish, right? The taxi driver thinks for a little bit. He says, I don't know, 4, 5 million, maybe? So when this fellow got to Rav Milevsky's house, he says to him, I never realized you were so choshev, you're really important. He says, why do you say that? He says, I came in the taxi driver told me there are 5 million Jews living in Mexico City. So Rav Milevsky started to laugh. He said, there are maybe 25,000, maybe. I think now things are larger than they were, but this is going back 30 years. 25,000 Jews. So his friend looks at him and says, how can that be? He says, how can it be that I understand if you want to tell me that there are 3 million and he said there are 5 million, that makes sense, right? But if there are 25,000 he says 5 million, how do you get to that? So he said it's very simple. Every single person, every professional person that the taxi driver is involved in is Jewish. Which means his lawyer is Jewish, his accountant is Jewish, his doctor is Jewish, his dentist is Jewish, his wife's gynecologist is Jewish, right? The judge who hears his speeding tickets over there in the court, he's also Jewish. He said, extrapolate it out, right? If all these people are Jewish, there must be millions of Jews in Mexico City. Of course, it's not true. It's just that Jews are high profile. That's a thing. Which means that we've got to work on making Jews, right? Living in a Jewish area gives you a skewed idea of what Israel's all about. Here, for example, over here, we live in Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is an Orthodox city. It really is. You tend to lose sight of what's going on. I think the yeshiva should maybe have field trips to Tel Aviv, just to let people remember that not everybody is like that. We need to connect with everybody. We need to have a connection with everybody. We need to love everybody, and we need to feel a sense of responsibility for everybody, in the hope that they'll feel a sense of responsibility for us as well. It should be a two-way street. Yeah. One last idea, something very fascinating. Rav Chaim Volozhiner, the sages teach that if the Torah is not learned even for a moment, the world will cease to exist. Rav Chaim Volozhiner took that very seriously, that responsibility. And in Volozhin, they had a system where the yeshiva was split into two. And one part of the yeshiva was learning a regular schedule, waking up in the morning and davening and then learning and then going to late at night going to bed. And the other part of the yeshiva was learning at night, which means that inside of the yeshiva in Volozhin, they were learning 24 hours a day. Because Rav Chaim Volozhiner took that as a very serious responsibility. However, interestingly enough, Rav Chaim Volozhiner, we're talking about 200 years ago, was the first of the rabbis in Eastern Europe to start sending a small trickle of students to America. There was nothing in America at the time. It was really a spiritual wasteland. Why did he do that? Because he said that he doesn't know how long he can take responsibility for Torah being learnt 24 hours a day. America is on the other side of the world, which means that when they're going to sleep, we're waking up. When we're going to sleep, they're waking up. That way, we can continue the cycle of learning Torah 24 hours a day. That's the importance of what Torah is.
See, was he related to Soloveitchik?
His grandson was married to a Soloveitchik. That's where the dynasty...
His son was Chaim Berlin?
No. Chaim Berlin was the son of the Netziv, Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin.
Okay.
Rav Naftali Tzvi Berlin was married. He was the grandson-in-law of Rav Chaim Volozhin. He was married to Rav Itzel's.
I just read
Rav Itzel Volozhin's, and his son was Chaim Berlin, and that's what the University of Bar Ilan is named after him. Right? Bar Ilan is Berlin, right? Whatever. Anyway, what's pshat here? Rav Chaim Volozhin wanted to establish a yeshiva where 24 hours a day they were learning Torah, right? Tel Aviv is described as being an ir bli hafsaka. Never rests. It's running. Tel Aviv runs 24 hours a day. And it's great that it does. It really is. But what we have to do is that we have to try to turn Tel Aviv into a metropolis, not just of being a metropolis like every other metropolis in the world and working 24 hours a day, but also in a spiritual dimension as well. And if we do that, then Emir Hashem will watch things changing. So we'll stop over here, Emir Hashem, to be continued.
That